I'm your host, Megan Jones, and today I'm joined by Jonty Pearce, Dougie Cameron, and Vatsana Gordon to talk just generally about forecasting, any problems you might have been having, and just best practice ideas, really. So, hello, welcome. You should be in the chat room already. And the first question has been posted, which was, how do you generate your forecasts? And while you're just answering that, Dougie, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yep, sure. I'm Dougie Cameron. I'm a consultant. I used to be a finance director and an operations director before that. I'm just north of Edinburgh. I used to work for B Sky B, and before that I worked for Coca-Cola and Scottish and Newcastle, which eventually morphed into Heineken. So from my finance and operations background, lots of experience in forecasting, although I will caveat now that I'm not a mathematician or a statistician, so it's very basic forecasting.
Brilliant. Vatsana, would you like to introduce yourself to the audience?
Hiya, my name's Vatsana Gordon. I'm Head of Workforce Management for HomeServe. I've worked in resource planning for about 15 years now, and contact centres for about 18. Worked in places such as Vodafone, Telewest, British Gas, and now obviously with HomeServe. And I guess from a forecasting perspective, I've worked with forecasting for the last 15 years, and the same struggles as everyone around trying to work out how can we get that forecast more accurate so that we can get the right staffing to delight our customers. So it's quite interesting seeing the chat come through. I think we all use the same methodologies looking at it. There's nothing new coming up so far. But it'll be interesting to see what we can bring to the table for everyone today.
Brilliant. And thank you. And Jonty, would you also like to introduce yourself to the audience?
I'm probably known to a lot of the audience. I'm Jonty Pearce. I'm the editor of CallCentreHelper, and I've been doing a lot of work recently on forecasting in terms of building built an online Erlang calculator for the website. We've been working on a monthly forecasting spreadsheet, and I had an idea of sort of trying to see if we could make a generic forecasting spreadsheet we could use on the site. And I thought, how difficult could that be? I thought I could probably do it in a couple of mornings. Well, 6 months later, and I'm probably about 1/3 the journey into that. So it's a lot more to it than I thought. As long as I stuck with a bendy ruler and a piece of paper and a graph, I could make a good forecast. But trying to turn that into something that is more flexible has proven to be more difficult.
Brilliant. Okay, so we are going to have a general discussion today involving the members of the audience as well. So I have already posted the first question into the chat room, and that is, how do you generate your forecast? Is that manually via spreadsheets or workforce management software? And we've actually had a few responses in already. So Henning has said WFM, Excel, manually. Seems to be using all the different combinations there. Mark saying spreadsheet at the minute, however they're getting workforce management early next year. Dougie, is that a trend that's emerging at the moment? A lot of people switching from spreadsheets to workforce management?
Yeah, I hope so, because certainly spreadsheets are not the most robust platform to build a business on.
Okay.
For me, forecasting is an art masquerading as a science. So I think it needs good human intervention into a forecast. You can't rely on statistics. So for me, I think the people that have got Excel spreadsheet and then into WFM is probably where I would be. Get the high level picture right in a spreadsheet where you can easily share it with people, and then start WFM once you get more granular with it. So yeah, I think that would be the trend, a really positive trend.
Okay, yeah, a few people have started to agree with you there. Julia said we start with a spreadsheet and then put the figures into workforce management for finer forecast amendment. And Ralph's also said manually for the monthly volumes and then using the workforce management tool for interval distribution. So
Interesting comment from Lucy, who says Excel for back office forecasts and WFM for front office.
I think that comes with the fact that when you look at WFM, it's very geared to the call center. So there's lots of algorithms in the workforce management system that will help you to define your requirements. You can't necessarily then use that algorithm for the back office. And you either, depending on which system you use, you can either have an add-on for the back office which takes away that algorithm, or you have to do it manually if you don't want to buy the add-on. So I understand why she would use forecasting for the back office via spreadsheet. And I think really, like Dougie said, a lot of the long-term planning you're likely to do in Excel, because you're going to use other factors rather than just historical data. But for that fine-tuning, the WFM system will have all of your interval data. You'll be able to trend that quite easily in the system. But from a monthly, long-term planning perspective, you need to take other factors as well as history. You need to look at your acquisitions, your retention rate, marketing activity, you know, your weather adjustments, your seasonality, all that kind of stuff, and any other externals that you want to add into your forecast. Because we do a lot of stuff where we'll have a base forecast, which is marketing and finance will tell us what the acquisition and retention rate will be, and therefore how many claims we will get. We'll translate that into calls, and then what we'll have is what we call overlays, which are efficiency drivers. So what do we want to do to make the contact center more efficient? So we're going to have projects that are going to drive volume down, average handle time down. We'll do all of that in a spreadsheet, and then we'll have a base forecast that we will load into the workforce management system at a monthly, weekly, daily basis.
It does seem from the chat room responses that a lot of people are using a combination of workforce management and the spreadsheets. Quite interestingly, it seems to chop and change which order they do it in, with a few people saying that they're using the workforce management software first and then checking against a manual forecast, as well as what we were looking at earlier. So I think we're going to move on to the next question now. I've already posted it into the chat room, and that is, how many years worth of data do you use to inform your forecast, and do you think it's enough? I know some people try and use about 5 years of data, but it can, you know, limit then if you've only got essentially 5 sections of January or 5 lots of data for February. Even over a long period, it's not necessarily that much data. Jonty, what's your opinion on the optimum amount of data for a forecast?
Well, it's quite interesting. I guess it depends how much data you've actually got. But I mean, a lot of the research I've been following seems to indicate that you need at least 2 years, really, because if you've got, you know, 1 year, you can look at the patterns over the year. Then you can get the second year will give you the trend.
Okay.
But a lot of people are saying you actually need 3 years, because you need a third year to see if one of those previous 2 years was wrong, or if there were any outliers in there. So it could be up to 3 years. But it's interesting. Connor's made an interesting comment here. It says, in theory, we should be using 2 years, but this isn't always possible for new products, as forecasting is still required in this place. You know, how do we deal if we have less than 2 years worth of data?
So my tuppence worth on that would be to replicate with something that you've seen a similar trend on. So if it is a new product, have you had a previous experience of launching a product, and what the growth and the contact rate have been like on that, and you know, and obviously tweaking that for the sensitivity on whether they are similar products or how different they are. So yeah, I think it's using something as a proxy. And back to the original question, I would go 3 years, but weighted more heavily towards recent years. So
okay.
Yeah, similar answer to most people.
Yeah, I think one of the other things, if you haven't got 2 to 3 years worth of data, is trying to find a relationship between some other data that you've got. So if you've got, for example, you've taken on a new contact center but you've only got a limited amount of data, but you know that there's a relationship with some other piece of information. If you can find that correlation, you can use the other data to then predict what you think is going to happen in that contact center. So for us, for example, if we've got claims data going back years, but our call center is relatively new, that correlation between the claims data will be able to give us a forecast or an indication of what we think is going to happen in that contact center. So correlation analysis for me is a great one to try and use if you haven't got the data. Find some other data and see if you can correlate it.
Yeah, because particularly a lot of the challenge with the forecast is taking the seasonality out of the data that you may be very busy in December and quiet in the summer, or maybe the opposite, you're busy at the beginning of the year and quiet at the end. And it's trying to get that seasonality out of the information so you can see what the underlying trend is. Once you've got your seasonality and your trend, then you can certainly put that together. It's quite interesting. Dave, who's a regular contributor to our forum, had a problem trying to forecast the World Cup, which I think was last summer, and it was difficult because he was working for a betting website, and they had to try and come up with a forecast of how many calls they'd got for an event they'd never covered before. So it was quite a challenge of how you fit that into the forecast. And then if you're not careful, if you don't take that out, the following year it would forecast a World Cup for the following year. So which
we had the same issue when I was at Vodafone, and at the time O2 were the only people who had launched the iPhone 3GS. We had no data on the iPhone, and we tried to predict what kind of uptake we would get when we launched the iPhone, and it went through the roof compared to what we expected. But you've got to take a punt with the data you've got. So like Dougie said, if you've got an indication of when you had a great launch of something, can you compare that, use the data that you've got from something else, and then try and build a forecast? But sometimes there are events that are so huge that even with every best endeavour, you won't get it as accurate as you want it to be. It's really hard when you do a product launch, especially if you've got nothing to compare it with. And Apple was a massive one for us at Vodafone. It's huge.
Well, generally looking at some of the chat room responses, 2 years seems to be the minimum that most people are using. Quite interestingly, Kelly has said, as an outsourcer, we use a much shorter history of 4 to 8 weeks and adjust for seasonality. And also Ralph said, having major changes every 12 to 18 months, it's impossible to use data older than 6 months, unfortunately. So perhaps people would like to have more data, but it's not always possible. The next question I thought we'd ask is, how accurate are your forecasts in light of the data that you're actually using? We've had a few responses through already. I had someone saying it isn't accurate because we couldn't archive their service level. Dougie, is that a common problem with forecasting?
Well, obviously with forecasting the call center, it's always really difficult to work out with the various spins that you'll get. If you get your forecast wrong, it's difficult to work out how wrong you really were and how much of that spin. So the amount of redials or longer handling times if you go too low on call rate. I mean, the target that I used to set at Sky was plus or minus 5% by week by line. And we were normally within that, that is that basically gives you a resourcing challenge. If you know that's your accuracy level, that is really how much you should be over-resourced for to keep a steady service level. But as is always the case, you get pressure not to do that.
Okay, and we've had an interesting response from Connor, who said we have different forecasts for different markets. Accuracy depends greatly on volume count. We see in large markets performing better, and small markets are very difficult. Aim to be within 15% error at daily volume level. was Mike said they aim for a weekly MAPE of 55%, and in reality that's closer to 10%, with service queues more accurate than sales.
Do you know what MAP stands for?
I think it might be moving average percentage error. That's certainly the measure I used. I'm not entirely sure on the acronym, but yeah, it's a moving average.
Percentage error. Is that similar to a standard deviation, or is that?
It's not a statistical measure. It's more a rolling measure. So as you drop 1 week out, another week comes in. I don't know. Maybe Mike can expand on that in the comments. I don't know.
Yeah, it's one of the dangers that we did a webinar on forecast accuracy, and we had Penny Reynolds from the call center school, who's fortunately now retired, or fortunately for her. And she said one of the challenge with forecast accuracy is how you measure it. If you take it across the course of a day or of a year, you could have got the forecast the right number of calls, but over the course of the intervals, it may have got really busy in the morning, really quiet in the afternoon, and you under-resourced and over-resourced. So what she suggested is using a standard deviation, or effectively taking the error and cumulative error from the forecast, rather than just saying what was and effectively squaring it, which is standard deviation, which showed how out you were for the forecast across the time period, rather than did the average work out.
Okay, and we've had a response back from Mike saying that the MAPE stands for mean average percentage error. For anyone who is interested in that. Okay. I've had a few more responses to the question, with Matt saying we use a moving average, which relates to smoothing. And Julia said we forecast by Q, but when looking at average, we combine them all to gain an overall percentage.
Raniera there says, how do you measure accuracy? Daily volumes or number of intervals within a certain range of accuracy? Vatsana, how do you measure your accuracy of which period?
Yeah, we used to try and measure by interval, and that was really, really tough because the volume, we're only talking about 25,000 calls a week. When you look at an interval level, we weren't that accurate. So we've gone back to reviewing sort of daily volumes, daily, weekly, monthly accuracy. And just making sure that we're within that 5 to 10% variance. Like Dougie said, it's about being able to have that tolerance, and we know that in our budget models we have that 5 to 10% buffer available from an overtime perspective, which means that we should literally be covered for those kind of peaks and troughs.
Okay, we're going to move on to our next question now. Is what have you tried to increase your forecast accuracy? For example, combining data sets where data is sparse is one strategy some contact centers use. Dougie, what's been your experience of this?
So I think it comes back to one of the comments I made at the top of this, which was that it's very much an art, and you'll notice quite quickly if the machine is giving spurious answers, and then it's a case of rolling up your sleeves and getting your hands dirty to work out what would happen. The best test of a forecast accuracy is going back in history and trying to reforecast the future. That's going to be the ultimate test of whether your model's better. So I would, I think it's just a case of getting back into the, really lifting the lid on it and trying to work out what went wrong and how you can make that better.
Yeah, I agree with that, Dougie. That's what we do on a regular basis, is we try and validate the model. Once we've got actuals, we take it back and see what the forecast would be to see if it gives us the same level of accuracy. That's something that we review on a monthly basis. just to double check and validify the model, as you said. And we do that in the same way with our long-term model as well, where we will get our head count, our actual call volumes, our actual AHT, and our actual shrinkage, look at what we would have had in our model as an FT requirement, and then looked at what we actually had, and then the service level prediction on that as well. So it's just to give people confidence that the modelling that you're doing is fairly accurate. I mean, it's never going to be 100%, but giving people confidence that you're there or thereabouts then helps to sell what you need to do and how many people you need.
Okay, an interesting question's been raised in the chat room alongside this of what intervals people are using for their forecasts. Connor says, I'm forecasting at 30 minutes and was asking if anyone else is working in a 15-minute interval. And there's actually been a range of responses come through, and 15 and 30 do seem to be in fair balance across the chat room participants at the moment. Dougie, what's your thoughts on this?
With all these things in call centres, the more granular, the better.
Okay.
So 15 minutes would be a great endpoint. But what I would say is if you're 30% out on the week, there's no point in trying to get down to 15-minute intervals. You know, work on hours and days before you try and because all you're doing is making the error even bigger in the 15 minutes. So
okay.
Yeah, try and get your overall accuracy better rather than worry about how granular you go. But I would say 30 minutes is a minimum.
And how low do some people go? Obviously, in the chat room,
15 is the lowest I've seen.
15 is the lowest you've seen.
Yeah.
Okay.
The interesting, Dave Appleby has talked with me about different time intervals. What he's measured, he's gone down to a more granular level to see what's coming in. He's adopted a 15-minute. What he finds is that across a lot of the call centres he's worked in, you do get a flood of calls just before the hour and just after the hour. So if it's like TV, it's like when the advert's about to have just come on before the news or the program's just changed. But in life, people have got, if you're working in business to business, people have meetings starting on the hour, so they just come out of a meeting and then make a call, or they want to make the call before they go into a meeting. It seems to be something very much around those time intervals. So I forget the figures. I think we published something on CallCentreHelper with a sort of ballpark figure, but there does seem to be a lift of calls in the first 15 minutes and in the last 15 minutes of the hour.
Yeah, I mean, working for Sky, we were acutely aware of that because it was as TV programs were starting and finishing, we would see our call spikes. And also, we could pretty much monitor the school holidays by our queues as well. You know, we would literally see, today it's 8 o'clock, 9 o'clock, after 9 o'clock we've got a queue because kids are off school and they're watching TV. So the key learning for me on that is not to go down to minute intervals or anything like that, but to make sure your shift starts are well in advance of the hour. If it's the start of the hour, or it's to make sure people are sat down and logged in for when you expect that peak to come in the 15 minutes.
That's fascinating.
Well, we've actually had a few responses to the question of what have you tried to increase forecast accuracy as well. Some people have said, Ralph said, getting better inputs from marketing about campaigns and working closely together with finance to have the best possible distribution of bills and reminders. Raniero said about tidying up historical data and excluding days with non-typical call volumes. A few more in here. Mark said we ensure that ordinary days are excluded from future forecasting. And Barry said the forecast for outbound is difficult. It depends on the bucket size and product. I think there's still a few more tips coming in there.
I think it's quite interesting. I've just been reading a book here called Thinking Fast and Slow by Daniel Kahneman, who's a winner of a Nobel Prize in economics. And one of the things he does in terms of the forecasting is that we often use algorithms to generate the forecast, because you've got to be very, very careful in there with outliers, because if you've got outliers that you've suddenly got a day where there's a spike of calls, and that's factored into perhaps the monthly forecast. If you're trying to match a curve or match, do a regression analysis, which a lot of automated systems do, it will build that spike into the forecast. So as the comment, I think it's from Renera, said, it is important to find a way of removing those outliers from the forecast, or else that really will affect forecast accuracy.
And one comment that's come through that's quite interesting is from Ralph, who's actually said paper bills are a pain, as you never know exactly when they're going to hit the mats. I suppose if you're sending out an email, you can be pretty confident it's going to be opened in the next few hours, but there's all sorts of delays with the post sometimes, isn't there? So interesting challenge.
Yeah, and the cheapest post has the less reliability of when the is it mail sort? Is it where they guarantee delivery within 8 days, isn't it? But they can't tell you which one it is.
So you might not save yourself any money really overall.
Dougie, you were originally a finance director by background. Do you think that could be false economy?
Yes, I think it could be, but how companies think is not that with that kind of clarity. So, as everyone knows, most companies think in silos. So the mail silo has improved, and somebody will be pointing fingers at why there's a poor service level in the call center, and no one will want to hear the story after you've signed a 3-year contract on MailSort why the knock-on effect has happened. So. Yeah, I mean, it's the biggest thing in customer experience for me is the silo, the silo problem, and it always ends up in the call center.
Okay, well, I've posted the next question of how do you keep track of anomalies in the data and make sure they don't skew your results with so many factors to think about? Is there a standard method for doing this? Jonty, what's been your experience of trying to keep track of these anomalies and not letting them skew the data too much?
I think it's really trying to work out what is driving the anomalies. Penny Reynolds used to say that there's probably a reason for the anomaly that you've got, and if it's a spike, you probably just don't know what that is. And the key is to really try and see if you could model that. So it could be simple things like weather, snow, and so on can have a big impact. You can actually you can get weather forecasts that will indicate where things like that come through. One of the big anomalies is often marketing campaigns, where marketing think, oh, it's a good idea, we'll just put out a TV campaign, and then don't tell you in advance in the contact center, or don't even. I mean, it would be nice if they could tell you in advance or work with you on airing it at a time when it's likely to be that you've got most staff coverage. So it's trying to find what those anomalies are and model those in the forecast.
That's one of our big struggles, I think, at the moment, is getting marketing and finance to understand the impact of what they do. And we have that quite a lot. And that it filters down to every service operation. So it's not just the call center, it's having engineers out in the field ready to handle this influx of volume. So we had our marketing guys send out newsletters on how to claim, giving them a nice process and a telephone number. We didn't know what was happening, had a massive big spike. It just caused havoc, and it's a poor customer experience at the end of the day. And that's what we're trying to get them to understand, because they work in large numbers, so they'll talk about millions of customers. They won't expect that 20,000 new customers might generate such a big impact for the contact center and then for the field. So we're working really hard with them to try and get them to understand that, because it has a huge impact for us. And from a weather perspective, we're really seasonal. So we've recruited an external meteorologist who's worked on correlating our job volumes against weather sensitivity, and we use that during the winter to estimate if we see a cold snap, depending on how will that affect our job volumes, and then we reverse engineer that back into the contact center.
So presumably you're having to deal with things like burst pipes, which come when you get a very, very cold snap.
Yeah, and because we deal with gas and plumbing, and gas is the one that's most sensitive. And we talk about a north-south divide, you know, the southern softy type attitude. That has come through in our data. So we know that the temperature sensitivity between the north and south is hugely different.
And which one's more sensitive? In the south, is it?
Yeah, the south, yeah, definitely. They turn their boilers on much quicker than people like Dougie, who most probably sit there in the freezing cold.
I wear shorts all year round.
Or is that a kilt?
Yeah, we had back in my days when I worked in the beer business, we also had a meteorologist, and we had a correlation. It was you know, what, an 8-week lead time to get beer from concept to actually out in retail, and so we used to know, I think it was something like for every 1 degree increase in temperature, there was a 3% increase in beer sales, and we had to obviously start the production on that quite a long way out. So yeah, weather definitely makes a big difference, and when you can measure it scientifically, it's a great tool.
Beer sound, that's amazing.
We've had some interesting responses come through in the chat room, including dealing with bank holidays separately, marking days especially within the workforce management system. Connor, quite funny, said, I'm glad it's not just me that marketing aren't talking to about these things. So yeah, it's obviously quite a common problem. Kelly said we exclude our anomalies, usually holidays, for planning for regular days, and then forecast and schedule our anomaly days separately, not using our workforce management system. And Peter says, where there are any irregularities in the data, we speak to the team and department and get insight into what happened. And quite interestingly, once I heard of a call centre who was actually keeping a written diary of little things, like if they noticed a spike in the weather or a temperature drop, or you know, got wind of a campaign that was going out, just little things that maybe even you didn't think were that important at the time, but when you're looking for the spikes in your data, you can actually say, oh, you know, there was a heat wave on that particular day that we didn't all notice because maybe we were all eating ice cream, but it actually made a difference. So you know,
I think the good thing now is that a lot of call centres are adopting speech analytics, and with speech analytics you can really sort of like start to find out why customers are calling, and if you can find out why they're calling, what the reason is, then you might understand what that spike is. And that helps a lot. We've only just implemented speech analytics, so we're not in the space where we're understanding why they're calling, but I think later on down the line this will really help us to understand those anomalies.
Okay. We're going to throw out a little bit of a curveball question now. That it would be, have you come across any interesting forecasting methodologies, for example, Holt-Winters or ARIMA? Jonty, what's been your experience with the different methodologies out there?
Yeah, I think certainly I've been looking at various different forecasting methods. Holt-Winters is exponential smoothing, where rather than a weighted average, it's like or a moving average. It's more weighted to recent events. And Holt-Winters is where you take 3 times of that for things such as a seasonality trend and trying to deseasonalize. It's often known as triple exponential smoothing. ARIMA is the new method that is being used by the Met Office for weather forecasting. It stands for autoregressive, I think I is integrated moving average. So it's where you build a auto-regression, so trend fitting back to the past data. But it tends to work better on data that they call as steady state data, a bit like the weather, where apart from global warming, it returns back to the same level, and you do need a lot of works better if you've got many years of data to go and model about. So there's certainly a number of different ones there, and it looks like Michael has come in with comments saying, I've tried Monte Carlo simulation in the past, which I think is something to do with putting a sort of some random numbers into it. He said he wouldn't recommend it, and he says we use a mixture of Holt Winters and ARIMA models. So, Michael, it'd be interesting to see what your experience is of that, and do you do both the Holt Winters and the ARIMA in a spreadsheet, or do you have separate systems that use that? So it'd be interesting to see that.
I think because we rely quite heavily on marketing and finance to provide a claims forecast for us, what we use is a lot of correlation analysis, and things aren't always linear, so we're looking at polynomial correlation analysis to be able to sort of have a look at different sets of data, putting them together and seeing where the relationship is so that we can forecast going forward. Because what we had before was we had finance saying, right, we've given you a claims forecast, this is a core per claim ratio, add that and that'll give you your forecast. Well, that didn't work, it failed dramatically for us. So what we've done is try to look at that correlation between claims and calls, but also add in seasonality as well, because what we've seen is that actually the claims forecast drops over winter, but we know that we'll still get the volume. So although we're not getting new customers, our existing customers will actually call in, and they won't be calling necessarily to claim, but it will be a follow-on, a chase call. So that's why a call to claim ratio doesn't always work, because customers might not be claiming, but they will be calling because they want to find out what's going on with their claim. And that's why we've had to sort of change the way we do our forecasting and start using sort of correlation analysis.
Okay, we've actually had a response back from Michael about Monte Carlo simulation, and he said it's a forecasting technique used in casinos with gambling-based data, which is quite interesting there.
One of the other ways of looking at trends in data, and as more research I do, the more reliable it seems to be, is actually using plotting stuff out on a graph, and you can get a reasonably good polynomial curve by just, if you've got one of these flexi rulers, of actually, it takes a little bit of, you can actually get from art shops, you can actually get ones that are like snakes where you can actually bend it round, but these are actually quite good for, I don't know if you can see that, you can get a reasonable trend on some data, and the human eye is actually very good at detecting trends in information, just seeing if what you're plotting fits in quite well to that, which is sort of surprising. But we're actually very good at complex spotting complex patterns.
And we've also had another comment in from Michael, who says we're also in the process of building an econometric forecasting tool, which will attempt to find relationships and trends from GPI, RPI, temperature, precipitation, number of online devices, etc., to determine if external, non-business related factors could be more successful in forecasting. So
wow, that's
interesting.
Yeah, that sounds interesting.
It sounds very comprehensive. It would be interesting.
So RPI is the inflation rate. Is GPI, is that the new? No, CPI is the. I don't know what GPI is there. Temperature, amount of rain, number of online devices. That's quite fascinating to look at all those different ones.
Okay,
Is GPI population?
I've just asked Michael to clarify the term, so hopefully he'll get back to us in the next minute or so. I think moving on to the next question, I think I might be about to open a bit of a can of worms here, but what is the biggest mistake you've ever made with your forecasting? Dougie, what's been your experience of things to try and avoid?
Well, I could probably spend an hour just going through the ones that I did in the last couple of months, but a forecast's always going to be wrong. The biggest mistake that I think any company ever makes in forecasting, however, is forecasting hopefully or optimistically. So the things that I've had pressure to build into our forecast, like call reduction as a result of live chat, for example, or average handling time as a result of reduced T's and C's. These things, putting them in until you've tested them and actually seen the results is setting you up entirely to fail. So for me, it is go forward with an initiative, embed it, learn from it, forecast on it. Don't forecast ahead of it, because if you scan social media for customer experience things, as I do, one of the most common things you'll see is people complaining about unprecedented call volumes in call centres causing a queue. They're not unprecedented, they're just that they've cut the call centre too tight because of an optimistic forecast. So that, if I had one plea for everyone, it's always try and fight back against optimistic forecasting.
It's not as easy as that, though, is it, Dougie? We're going through the budget process now, and I've been in HomeServe for 2.5 years now, and every single budget we have an efficiency driver, like 10% reduction in headcount, and every year I say, do you have a project that delivers this? Are you sure that you can deliver this kind of benefit? It's dangerous to put it in without actually testing it. And I feel like a bit of a broken record, because I know that by the end of this month I would have done the budget for next year, and I will still have some dangerous overlays to deliver benefits that I know won't be delivered because they didn't deliver this year or last year or the year before. So I would like, Dougie, how do you get that message across, and how do we push back effectively? Because I know as a resource planning professional that sometimes you feel like you're the person of doom who's saying that we can't achieve these kind of efficiencies. I feel like a lone voice. So how have you managed to be able to sort of push back on that?
It's one of life's eternal frustrations. I think there was a survey by Gartner just recently, which was a ridiculously high percentage of CEOs now think that customer experience is going to be the new battlefield, but most of them haven't got plans to actually do anything about it. So for me, it's about taking the conversation away from finance and putting the conversation back in customer terms. So when I was at Sky, we used to actually run 2 forecasts at the weekly volume level, as opposed to down at the interval level. And we used to say the forecast will fall somewhere between these 2 levels. Using existing trends, we think this is what will happen, and using stretch targets, we think this is what will happen. If we get this wrong, the impact on the customer is going to be this amount of service level, which frankly I guessed most of the time, but there was eventually a learning curve on it after we had a lot of how can this possibly happen conversations, and we said, we told you this was going to happen, and it kind of changed the conversation. But every company is looking for savings, and call centres seem like obvious places to get savings, even though there's probably better places to get it.
Well, so if I take recently, we put some overlays in for volume reduction over winter, which made our forecast flat for the year instead of seeing an uplift over winter. And as you can imagine, that hasn't delivered, and we're seeing an increase. And we're in winter now, and we're only just starting to recruit. Now, had we recruited in the summer, we'd be in a really good position now. But we highlighted the risks in summer, and this is me being totally honest with you. We highlighted the risks in summer, but we seem to be in a groundhog situation where we do this every year, and it's one of those really complicated, hard things to get people to understand who don't work in the contact centre.
And it's quite interesting. I think in a lot of companies, marketing have got a very good correlation between what they do and the benefit it produces to the business. But I think within the contact center industry, because we're always looking at efficiency, that's the only way we can articulate what the impact is. And so it's always looking at making it more efficient. Whereas if we actually start to go beyond that and say, what is the value we do in terms of things like customer retention and holding on to customers? And if we could put that into a more, we could work out, for every point of service level that we lose, that could increase customer losses. Then it becomes, so we get some extra heads here, we'll reduce our attrition rate, which means we don't have to spend marketing money, and it's much more effective to do it in the call center. So I think somehow, and this may be a webinar for another day, we need to look at how we could build those business cases so that we can actually put some meat on the bone, so that when the chief execs get the idea of customer experience is important, we can actually quantify that financially.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting one. Yeah, in the newer economy companies, the Facebooks, the Twitters, and anyone that's not got a history, they don't have to work on the same short-term targets, so they have a different approach to how they live life. CEOs are generally looking at quarterly targets, and the concept of retention being better because of better service levels is almost nebulous to them, when they could take every other light bulb out and half their electricity bill, as they used to do when I was in my youth. So it's one I can't work out how to move people on in that equation. It seems so logical.
It is logical, and I think as well, we've adopted a strategy where our frontline come first, because they're the interaction with the customer. But we talk about them being the face of the company. If we want to retain our customers, provide them a great service. But again, the strategy might say that, but when we go to where can we get our efficiencies, it always comes down to the call center, even though marketing will have a massive budget to generate acquisitions, yet we don't always squeeze the contact center and the service operation, when really that is the face of the customer.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, going back to the chat room, a few people have posted some of their mistakes with forecasting that they've had. Connor said providing a forecast for a market that was too small and too segmented with the data. Kelly said blindly trusting a client's forecast. Michael said missing a 0 from a monthly total. This meant we supplied significantly less resource than demand required.
Whoops.
Ralph says not strictly a mistake, but we once shocked one of our clients with a terrible service level forecast, and the reason was that we used a completely different formula to calculate the service level than they were used to.
There's an interesting study I saw. Something like 26% of spreadsheets contain errors in them because people, take columns down. The big classic one is you add an extra line at the bottom, doesn't get it in. But it's actually a very high number of spreadsheets. I did one piece of work. I found this marvelous correlation between two pieces of information that I wanted, and I started telling people all about this great correlation. Went back to the data the following week, and I actually spotted a mistake that showed there was actually no correlation between the between the data. It's a little bit late then.
And we've just had one more
and
mistake.
That happens a lot. Excel errors. We've done the same thing where we took out a line, the VBA code, then put all the forecasts in different lines, and you don't notice it until someone goes, this forecast is a bit wrong. It's either too high, too low, and then because you're so used to just churning the information out, you didn't realize that actually there's a big mistake in the actual code. Happens all the time. There's human error, isn't it? That you can't get away from it.
Yeah. So we're going to move on to the next question now, which is, do you find it difficult for people to buy into your forecast? Dougie, what are your thoughts on this? Is this a big challenge for forecast planners?
Yeah, if the volume is too high, no one will want to see it. So that is the biggest problem, is that you can build a forecast with all integrity and all the intelligence you have, and if it comes out with an answer that's financially or resource-wise unacceptable, then people don't like to see it. And it's a human response, but not necessarily a logical response that's best for a company. So I tend to be quite measured and accommodating with people's bias like that, and then try and talk them through. And I always try and talk about the impacts. So if I've got this wrong, I'll take it that we've spent too much money. But if I've got this right and we don't resource it properly, then the company and the customers are going to suffer.
Is there also grounds for simplifying the data, maybe making some different graphs and just making it more relatable for the board that you're pitching to potentially?
Yeah, I mean, as a planning director, I was dealing with people who weren't necessarily in the detail that I was. So my aim would be one slide of A4 with as few numbers as possible on it, just pulling out key points. So people don't need to know how you built the forecast or the history of it or anything like that. You can build your own credibility, and then you get to the point where you can show as few numbers as possible for people to buy into.
Quite interesting. Kelly has said generally there's no problem having upper management buy into the core forecast. The corresponding staffing needs is often a different story, which I think is similar to we've discussed before. And Michael said it's fairly easy to get people to buy in if your forecast's been fairly accurate in the past. It's an easier sell. It's newer product type forecasts sometimes have issues with.
Great. And Vatsana, what's been your experience of this?
So it's a difficult one, I think. Forecasting in general, we always find that the general census is when there's a lot of pressure, the forecast is wrong. Now, a forecast in itself is a forecast. It's an educated guess. Doesn't matter what methodology you use. It's an educated guess. And what I think is really difficult for people to get buy-in into is that we are trying really hard to plan best endeavours, and then trying to get them to buy into the fact that there will be an error rate, and that things will be wrong, and that these huge spikes that we get, it's not that the forecast is wrong. There's a different variable that has caused that maybe we haven't taken account for. So from a buy-in perspective, getting buy-ins quite easy for your baseline forecast. It's then when you get those outliers and where you get big variances that people lose confidence in the forecast, and then rather than looking at how we can solve issues, we just say, well, forecast was wrong and therefore we were always set to fail, whereas actually it might be something else that we could have done to be able to offset that. Does that make sense?
Yep.
Yeah. Corinne said we document all adjustments with justifications, so we have a point of reference if people are reluctant to buy into it, which goes back again, I suppose, to what you were saying, Dougie, about making it relatable to the people that you're talking to. If you can then justify what you're trying to sell, there'll be a bit more buy-in there.
I mean, you quite often end up with two different kinds of conversations. There's one which is, or three. There's one which is, this forecast suggests that we're going to be fine. There's one which is this forecast suggests it's going to be tight, and people are generally okay with that one. And there's the other one which is, this forecast suggests we're going to have to invest heavily to save ourselves from this problem. That's the one that people don't like to hear. No one likes to see the outcome if it's bad service level, and everyone forgets that we said it was going to be tight. But it's that step change in investment in people and resources that's the one that people really don't like having.
Is there any key strategies to bear in mind when having those difficult conversations, Dougie, that just make things a little bit smoother?
No, it's just remember they're going to be. It's just remember they're going to be difficult, and always put it back to the customer. And everyone, I watched my old boss on Watchdog a couple of weeks ago, and he always used to say that I would be the next one that would have to go on. Back when I worked there, and if there's ever a problem again, you're going on. And I had some join sending him a text afterwards saying what went wrong. But it's trying to keep fresh the bad times of when you said it was going to be bad, so that people don't want that feeling again.
I might do that. I might show them last year and this year, so that when we finalise the budget, they have fresh in their mind what's happened. Because we're in it now, so hopefully when we sign it off in a month's time, they've still got that fresh feeling of the pain we're going through this winter.
Yeah. And the other thing is, it's normally relatively small sums of money in the scheme of things that would actually save the service level. Everyone's in different sizes of call centres, but when I was at Sky, they would spend millions on driving volume into the call centre for sales. Yeah. But you're trying to save a couple of 100,000 in resource, and exactly. The equation just doesn't stack up. And that's the bit that is really difficult. The conversation that's really difficult to convert into action.
Yeah, I think that's the hardest bit, because we see millions being pumped into the marketing campaign, yet we know that we're suffering. The pressure's on, but it's trying to translate the requirement that we have against the value, because that's the bit that, if we could quantify that better, I think then we'd really be onto a winner of not trying to drive efficiencies in the contact centre all the time.
Yeah,
it's very good. An interesting, very similar comment from we talked about getting buy-in to forecasts and when they're right or not. Connor said, yeah, it's very easy to call out or remember when forecasts have missed on a point, but people very seldom remember when it was actually on target.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. I think the only people who realise that is the planning team, who have a little bit of a clap when we're well below 1% forecast variance. I think that the celebrations are only in planning.
I think we've got time for just one more question now. How do you forecast email, web chat, and social media? Dougie, what has been your experience with these channels?
So, well, the queuing's different, isn't it? So, when I've used it in the past, they've not been major channels. But using a historical trend, probably relating it to call volumes, there should be a relationship there. Email, you're trying to keep the turnaround time as small as possible. Generally, email, web chat, and social media, there's some multi-skilling going on there as well. But with all of these now, they have to have the same degree of robustness and forecasting as calls do, because web chat, if you offer web chat, you've got to have somebody there to chat. Social media, a response over 2 hours now is just unacceptable for service. So, they just need to whatever method you use, whether that's past trends or, and I think it's mainly a relationship to call volume, because it's just an alternative channel for people. That's got to be the way forward.
Well, Julia said we have our emails delivered through the telephony software, so we forecast in the same way as inbound calls. And it's also said they've been using this for a couple of years, so we have historical data to forecast from as well. And Ralph said we use historical data to predict impact of new campaigns, or we do a test with a small amount of customers to check the impact first. And Vatsana, what's been your experience with the different channels and forecasting for them?
So from a different channel perspective, same as Dougie really, I relate a lot of the channels and the relationship between those and the call centre. We do the same with our job volumes as well. We know from a claim perspective that at the moment our main channel is the inbound calls. So we know that there's a strong relationship between inbound calls, our online claims, and our emails are all a smaller proportion of that inbound traffic. So it's all about relationships and correlations, really. It's the main avenue that we use. and we just keep checking and validating to see whether or not those relationships change.
Yeah, one of the questions I get asked in the forum a lot is, I'm thinking of bringing web chat into the contact center. How do I forecast that? And with no experience of it. Certainly, the one bit of advice I tend to do is that, on average, web chat seems to be making up between about sort of 5 and 10% of overall volumes in the contact center. So if you plan that perhaps if you introduce it, it would get up to say 5% in say 6 months. You could perhaps stagger it, 1%, 2%, 3%, and then once you start getting it in, you can then validate whether that forecast was accurate and start to try and build forecast levels against that.
Well, thank you very much for that, Jonty, but I think that's all we've got time for today. So thank you so much to the audience for participating in the discussion, and thank you also to our guest speakers for being on the call with us. Our next live chat session is on absence and agent retention and will be taking place on Thursday, the 26th of November. So hopefully we'll see you again soon. And the link has been posted into the chat room, so you can just click through and register for that now. So thanks everyone. Goodbye. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.